Hello fellow Gwent players. I built 12 decks to showcase my point of how the Circle of Gwent works and what you as a player can do to work around the Circle of Gwent. Let's do this. Now how the Circle of Gwent goes, or as I like to call it, the little triangle with a star up top, is simple. You have Point Slam, which beats Control, which beats Engines, which beats Point Slam. So you have a sort of circle, and on the little star is combo decks. Now I want to start off with Point Slam, as it is pretty much the simplest concept. The first deck of Point Slam is Gurnikora, as she is probably the most Point Slam leader. You can also use Woodland Spirit instead of her if you want more provisions. Now this deck really represents well how Point Slam decks work. The whole idea is to get more points than provisions for every single card. The best example for this are the Thrive units, which are little tiny engines that, if not kept under check, can be really devastating in a long round. Winning the long round 1 is very important because then you can push round 2 to go for a short round, and this is where the Point Slam gets interesting. Cards like Old Spear Tip, both asleep and awake, Caldwell, those cards can definitely win you a short round 3. Now this concept works really well against Control, but how do you win against Engines? Well, you as a deck builder always need to prepare for the inevitable, and that is you're gonna face a matchup which you're not favored in. So what you need as a Point Slam deck is control options. There's things like Parasite, there's the neutral 4-deal-4 cards, Gimpy Gerwin is always a nice little option. Crones to some extent also have some sort of control. Now me personally in this deck, I use Predatory Dive because it's really strong if you win coin flip and the opponent gives the card a tactical advantage boost. Now the next deck for Point Slam is Bran. Now the whole idea for Bran is that you have one of the most overpowered cards in Coral, which can provide 13 value if you have 3 specials in your hand and also have a Bran leader tick. But these special cards can also be used for utility purposes. Dimeridian Bomb, for example, can be used against Scoia'tael traps. For the control options, as always, the 4-deal-4 neutral cards. In Skellige, there's 2 really good ones with Knut and Hjalmar. Hjalmar especially is very strong as he can deal up to 12 damage with Yuta, but you don't really want to use Yuta as your Hjalmar target because you want to use your Yuta rather as a Sigrifa's Right target. But cards like Disgraced Brawler and Veteran can be really useful for Hjalmar. Now the last of the Point Slam decks is Nilfgaard. To be specific, it's Human Nilfgaard. Human Nilfgaard because of Doppler. Doppler can provide a ridiculous amount of value if played early on. Now because of the human restriction, this deck doesn't have a lot of control and is probably the worst one of the Point Slam decks right now. But it can still easily beat Control with combo pieces like Asai Roach into Vivian for a total of 19 points in 2 turns, which is ridiculous. Now Point Slam is very good against Control, but it's not very good against Engines. Right now, Scoia'tael is by far the best faction when it comes to Engines. Most notably, Dana. And the trick with Dana is that you use the first round to create carryover with cards like Dwarven Agitator or Hawker Smuggler. But the big selling point of this deck is the combo with Dana and Fav plus Water of Brokilon. And if the opponent cannot deal with that, it's pretty much 2 points a turn as you're running a very diverse deck. Another big point finisher is Barnabas Beckenbauer, providing a total of 12 points if an elf, a dwarf, and a dryad are on the board. In general, this is a really strong engine deck. It can easily beat a Point Slam deck and might sometimes even overwhelm some control decks. Now Dana is not the only Scoia'tael leader that works well with engines. Philavandrel is also a very strong leader to do that. The way you play Philavandrel is different from every other leader. You try and push round 1 so hard that you can pass on 7 cards in your hand. Now in round 2, if you know your opponent will push the round, you can Philavandrel immediately or even wait 2 turns to really make sure that the opponent is pushing you. And even if the opponent pushes round 2, Gabor Zigrin, if he's in your hand, can be a ridiculous amount of carryover for round 3. Unlike in Dana, you can in this deck also run Matrons, and if they stay alive, they can produce 2 points a turn, which is really strong. Now the last engine deck that I want to show is Meave Engines. I want to give a shout out to Sir Pumpkin for telling everyone to put Ale of the Ancestors into their Northern Realms engine decks. Ale of the Ancestors pretty much replaces Philavandrel or Dana, but you have to draw it, which is kind of unreliable. But it's the best thing that Northern Realms pretty much has to something that will keep the engines alive, because sometimes Meave just isn't enough. This deck just thrives on engines that can give you 2 points per turn, such as Windhelm or even Anastrager. Then you have the classic combo piece of Avalak into Visigoda, which is just a abnormal amount of points if pulled off in round 3. But the problem with this deck is it's really hard if you're getting pushed round 2, because you can't really use your Ale of Ancestors in round 2 because it's such an important card in round 3. So be careful of when you want to play your Ale of Ancestors. This concludes engines. Now, obviously, engines is not very favored against control, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Now, the first deck for control is Eithne. When you're playing a control deck, you can just slap together a bunch of cards that say deal damage. Well, you kind of do need some proactive plays sometimes, and Scoia'tael has some really good proactive cards with Sisenthesis and Ithlin, who are ridiculously strong as proactive plays. I also run Gabor Zirgin in this deck because he allows me to lose round 1 if I have him in hand, which can be very helpful against some point slam decks to have an extra 5 points on your board. But sometimes against these unfavored matchups against point slam, you just don't have enough points. So you could play something like a Curse of Corruption or a Scorch if need be, but I don't like using these cards because I do run Sisenthesis and Gregoire. The next control deck is Skellige Crack. It's pretty much like the Scoia'tael deck, where you put a lot of cards to just say deal damage, and there's plenty of those in Skellige. But as I said, with the Eithne list, you do need some proactive cards, one of which is Disgraced Brawler, an extremely nice little proactive play, who also enables a big Hjalmar. Another proactive play I like is Deran into Morkvarg, which provides 9 points. Berna Bran and Harald Houndsnout, obviously also very good proactive plays. Now the last control deck is Detlaf. He's not as strong as he used to be before the patch, but now he seems to be a bit more balanced. Now Detlaf, removal wise, is arguably one of the weaker leaders. That's because the monster faction doesn't really have that many good removal cards. One of which is Parasite, but that's just a spell, so it doesn't really produce any points for you. But where this deck is not lacking, it's proactive plays, whether that be Old Spear Tip, Count Caldwell, or even Wild Hunt Riders. I'd say Monsters Control is not really meta, so I wouldn't recommend any of you play it. It's really not that good, because Eithne and Crack pretty much are the best control leaders in the game right now. Now, to summarize this whole thing, if you're playing Point Slam, add control cards. If you're playing control, add some proactive cards. And if you're playing engines, add some things that can keep your units alive. Now that we've discussed the triangle, let's talk about that little star up there. Now what the whole idea behind combo decks is that they want to go into round 3 with as many cards as possible to complete their combo. But there are some good combo decks. The best example for this is Hubert. You're literally building your whole deck around Hubert. Your leader synergizes with Hubert, and you just create a ridiculously big Hubert. Another combo deck is Bran Bearmasters. Now this deck has a bit more utility than other combo decks, but you're still just playing around one card, and that card is Bearmaster. You use cards like Spring Equinox on things like Germain or even the Svalbard Totem to make the doomed beasts not doomed, and just to give you more points on the Bearmaster. Now the last combo deck is Arrakis Queen into Glutzy Werp. The whole idea is here just to get a really big Glutzy Werp in the end. Now what makes all of these combo decks special is that they really don't care who they're facing. All they want to do is get their combo off. It really depends on your decision making on how well you play with these combo decks. And this concludes the Circle of Gwent. I hope I gave you a nice little insight on how the environment of Gwent works and how you can, as a deck builder, work your way around the circle and make your deck perfect. Now, if you did enjoy this video, a like is greatly appreciated. Subscribe for more Gwent content, and I'll see you soon.